welcome everyone. So great to see you all. My name is Noah Sachs. I'm a professor here in the law school. I teach environmental law, and I direct our Center for Environmental Studies. And I'm thrilled to see this turnout today. We have a lot of student groups supporting this. This event is sponsored by the Environmental Law students and by the Environmental Law Society, by the Black Law Students Association, and by the Public Interest Law Association. And we have two amazing speakers today, Kendall Crawford and Queen Shabazz. Kendall will speak first. She is the director of Virginia Interfaith Power and Light, which is a relatively new group which is bringing together faith communities from all over Virginia to work on climate and energy issues. She was formerly with the Sierra Club and has done community organizing all over Richmond and really all over the state. And training in environmental justice and community organizing from the EPA and other groups. And Queen Shabazz is the founder of United Parents Against Lead, and has been an environmental justice activist really for decades, and founded the group after she found out that her own son had been the victim of lead exposure. So she's been working on lead issues and environmental justice more broadly for many years here in Richmond and around the state and even nationally. And I'm pleased to say that both of them are spiders. Kendall graduated with a master's just, 2 years ago? Last year in nonprofit management. And Queen is currently a spider. She is a community partner in residence with our Center for Civic Engagement. And so she's on campus for the semester or for the year?
For the semester.
For the semester. And are you free to meet up with folks?
Sir.
And where are you located on campus?
I'm in the library, down in the basement of the library.
Okay. So let's give them both a round of applause. Batteries. And yeah, Kendall, if you want to go first.
Because I am organizer first and foremost, today I've brought with me a petition to encourage Governor Northam to support the Green New Deal. So I'm just going to get this circulating around. And if you're interested in signing, please do.
It's working.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for the invitation, Marla, and thank you everyone for coming out this afternoon to talk about this important topic. You can just hit the next one.
It just worked.
That's all right. Great. So, we're at our first slide. Normally I like to start all of my presentations just with me confessing to you all that I am coming with this with bias. This is a picture from Hurricane Katrina, which was a monumental moment in my life. I'm not from New Orleans, I wasn't there when it happened, but I do tell you that my thinking about environmental issues was deeply shaped by Hurricane Katrina. When that happened, it revealed two things to me. Number one, we are living so intimately connected with the environment, even though we're not constantly doing that. And so many of us don't normally think about that connection because it's so easy to not when you're, inside, cozy, warm from the rain. And the second thing that really came to me in watching Hurricane Katrina unfold is that our society still has a long way to go in terms of addressing, making sure that the country is equitable, an equitable place, to make sure that we have freedom and justice for all. So that has shaped my thinking on this, and so I've always thought of environmental issues from a justice lens, from a moral lens framework. So today,
Now it's working.
great. So today, this presentation, we'll be talking a little bit about a brief history of the environmental justice movement, a little bit about what is environmental justice, and then I'll move into environmental justice in the context of Virginia. And I'm hoping that by touching on those three things, I'll set it up perfectly for Queen to kind of take us home with talking about a lot of the environmental justice collaborative work that's going on today, which is very exciting. So a brief history of the environmental justice movement. So this is a picture from Warren County, North Carolina in 1973. And what's happening here is commonly referred to as one of the origins of the environmental justice movement. So in 1973, the war transformer companies dumped around 31,000 gallons of polychlorinated biphenyl, that's PCBs, on the side of roadways in 14 North Carolina counties. Okay, so PCBs are bad, they are carcinogens, that means they cause cancer in humans and animals. PCB production was actually later banned in the US in 1979. But anyway, this company had dumped all these PCBs along the side of the roadways. And so the state thought, okay, maybe it's not a good idea that we have all these PCBs dumped, all this toxic soil along the roadways. So the state of North Carolina decided to build a landfill for this toxic soil. So where they decided to put it was in Chaco, which is in a rural town in Warren County. And at the time, there was no mayor, no city council, it was about 75% African American, and out of 100 counties in terms of GDP, it was ranked 97th, so very poor county as well. And so what happened in Warren County? The citizens did not want it there, so they organized. And they organized and they were able to attract national attention. They were able to attract support from across the nation. So eventually what happened, there were 3 lawsuits, multiple public hearings, a few scientific studies, and finally Warren County commissioners reached a compromise with the state government in 1982 that the landfill would not expand. So 1973, all this kind of started. Now we're in 1982. The following year, 1983, toxic water was discovered under the landfill, which revealed a contamination crisis. The landfill wasn't lying. And so it took from 1983, when all of that toxic water was discovered, 1973, all of the protesting began, and the decision was made to locate the landfill there. And it wasn't until 2003 that the state started a cleanup program. And so I wish I could tell you that this was, the only time this happened, that, a community of color, that a low-income community was straddled with environmental burdens disproportionately. But this story is told over and over and over again in the US and also around the world. So the next thing I wanted to point out from the history of the environmental justice movement was a letter that was sent by the Southwest Organizing Project. And the reason why I like pinpointing this letter is because for a large part of the history of the environmental justice movement, environmental justice wasn't even seen as part of the environmental movement. It was seen as a civil rights issue, a social justice issue. And so because it had been viewed like that, as you can imagine, there are many communities of color that were frustrated by the work of environmental organizations. And so this letter, I encourage you to jot it down, Southwest Organizing Project letter, and maybe read the whole thing to yourself later on, but I just wanted to read some excerpts from it. So this was written from several organizations representing communities of color to a lot of the big green organizations. Big organizations like the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, big green. For centuries, people of color in our region have been subjected to racist and genocidal practices, including the theft of lands and water, the murder of innocent people, and the degradation of our environment. Mining companies extract minerals, leaving economically depressed communities and poisoned soil and water. The U.S. military takes lands for weapons production, testing, and storage, contaminating surrounding communities and placing minority workers in the most highly radioactive and toxic work sites. Industrial and municipal dumps are intentionally placed in communities of color, disrupting our cultural lifestyle and threatening our communities' futures. Workers in the field are dying and babies are born disfigured as a result of pesticide spraying. Although environmental organizations calling themselves the Group of 10 often claim to represent our interests in observing your activities, it has become clear to us that your organizations play an equal role in the disruption of communities. There is a clear lack of accountability by the Group of 10 environmental organization towards third world communities in the Southwest, in the United States as a whole, and internationally. Your organizations continue to support and promote policies which emphasize the cleanup and preservation of the environment on the backs of working people in general and people of color in particular. And then I've skipped over a large portion of the letter, but you can kind of see where it's going. And then it concludes by saying, it is our sincere hope that we be able to have a frank and open dialogue with your organization and other national environmental organizations. It is our opinion that people of color in the United States and throughout the world are clearly endangered species. Issues of environmental destruction are issues of our immediate and long-term survival. We hope that we can soon work with your organizations in helping to assure the safety and well-being of all peoples. And so this letter, you can see that it was a result of many, many years of exclusion of communities. And so the reason why I think it's important to include this letter in the history of environmental justice is because it gives us a framework, it gives us a history of where the environmental movement has been, and also, of course, recognizing this history, we know that we want to chart a more inclusive environmental movement moving forward, one that is informed by community members at the local level and indeed sees social justice issues as a part of the environmental movement as a whole. So now talking a little bit about what is environmental justice. So the EPA, of course, has defined environmental justice. So you can read the definition there. You can see the two big parts: fair treatment, meaningful involvement. Again, in my thinking of environmental justice is that we don't just stop at fair treatment and meaningful involvement. And my elevated goal, my hope, is that not all communities are equally oppressed, but there is collective liberation for us all. So not that we have a equal distribution of environmental burdens, but we seek to abolish all of those burdens. But getting back to the EPA definition, we see the 2 points: fair treatment and meaningful involvement. Let's dig into what that means. So fair treatment, all people, all communities, all races, all classes, all incomes. And of course, wherever we see communities lacking economic power, wherever we see communities lacking political power, environmental justice becomes a concern because their voices are not always heard. And so digging deeper, meaningful involvement. It's not tokenism. You know, it's not waiting to the last minute. It's not just checking a box. It shouldn't be an afterthought. Communities should be able to participate in the decision-making process. And that means that the public actually actually has the ability to influence a change that is being change a decision that is being made, and that the community's concerns are actively listened to. The onus should be on our public agencies and decision makers to reach out to potentially impacted communities. So that's the official definition from the EPA, but I think it's important, again, that people are speaking for themselves. So like reading the letter from the Southwest Organizing Project, I also wanted to highlight another resource for you all. And you can see the website at the bottom of the slide there, ejnet.org/EJ, the Principles of Environmental Justice. So these, I will not read all of them, but these were written by the People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit that took place in 1991 in DC. And that's actually a picture from the summit on the slide. And there are 17 environmental justice principles, and the first time I read these, I just need to tell you that my mind was blown, because they just do an excellent job of making environmental justice intersectional, and you just see the connections between many different aspects of social justice work. So I'll only point out a few of the 17 principles right now, but I do want to encourage all of you to look them up maybe later when you're back in your dorms or at home. So the very first principle, and again, I am working for a faith-based organization, so faith is important to me. The very first principle is environmental justice affirms the sacredness of Mother Earth, ecological unity, and the interdependence of all species, and the right to be free from ecological destruction. So that's the very first principle, and I just think that's very exciting, because obviously they were thinking about the order in which they presented the principles, and for that one to be the first one, I just think it says a lot to kind of the sacredness of the space that we're sharing, and the value of all, not all people, but all species. And then the very last principle is number 17, and so number 17 is about personal and consumer choices. And so also that was on purpose, to put our personal and consumer choices at number 17, and to recognize sacredness as number 1, because number 17 realizes in placing personal and consumer choices at number 17, they have realized that it's many types of social structures that are influencing environmental justice and influencing the way that we treat each other. It's not just all down to our personal choices. So please check out the environmental justice principles when you get home. So the last section of my, excuse me. So the last section of my presentation for you all today is talking a little bit about environmental justice in Virginia. And I thought it would be very helpful for me to give some of my perspective of the past couple of years. And of course, my perspective is also someone that has been working in like mainstream nonprofits. So I want to define where I'm coming from. So the way I see it, in 2014, I don't know if folks remember, but that was back when the Dan River in North Carolina spilled. And I think that the way that fits in with environmental justice is because I think it really started to open up the conversation about who is this impacting. Which communities live near coal ash ponds? Which communities are suffering the health impacts there? And then also in 2014, the Clean Power Plan was proposed. I'm not sure if you all remember that, but it was part of the Obama administration's actions to limit carbon pollution from power plants. And so that was another big thing that happened in 2014. And so why does it matter that I'm talking about the Clean Power Plan? Well, when that was proposed, of course, there were people all around the nation that were really excited about it because we're working towards climate action. And so here in Virginia, we realized that we were talking about the Clean Power Plan, but there wasn't much discussion about how the Clean Power Plan would impact equity, how it would impact low-income communities, how it would And so 4 organizations started having conversations about, excuse me, about that. And so those at the time were Southeast Care Coalition, New Virginia Majority, We Act for Environmental Justice, and Appalachian Voices. And so they began having these conversations around the Clean Power Plan and around thinking, how can we include, or how will the Clean Power Plan affect those communities?
Okay, don't just about like 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes,
Yep.
great. Well, good. So, so that's 2014, 2015. So from those conversations that were being had by those 4 organizations, then in 2015, the Environmental Justice Collaborative was created as still a pretty unofficial organization of organizations thinking about environmental justice in Virginia. So 2016, and this also plays into the Clean Power Plan. So in Virginia around that time, climate obstructionists in the General Assembly basically made it so that the state could not use any money to look into the Clean Power Plan. And so that, in response, the governor said, okay, well, if we can't use any state money to look at the Clean Power Plan, what can we do under existing state authority to limit carbon pollution? And so that was Executive Order 57. And as a part of the Executive Order 57 process, there was a whole big long work group. And so this work group was created to come back to the governor to tell him, you know, what things we can do under existing state authority to limit carbon pollution. So the Environmental Justice Collaborative saw that there was an opportunity there, and so we sent 2 people to actually go and present to that work group. And actually one was Dr. Mary Finley Brooke, right here from University of Richmond, and then the other was Reverend Dr. Faith Harris, who's the chair of Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. And so one of the recommendations they gave to the Executive Order 57 working group was that there be a council, Environmental Justice Council, created in Virginia to give recommendations to the government on how we can more effectively address environmental justice issues. So we were very excited to see at the time, a few months later, that that recommendation actually made it into the report that was given to the governor by the EO 57 work group. And the first meeting of the Environmental Justice Council was actually held in December of that year in 2017. So the first meeting was December 2017, and so for the next year, the council received public comments, many of those which were about the pipelines. I'm not sure if you've heard about all the kind of the struggle around pipelines in the state, specifically the Atlantic Coast Pipeline and the compressor station for that. And so in the summer of 2018, the Environmental Justice Collaborative, the council, the official governor's body, sent a letter to Governor Northam asking for a study on these disproportionate impacts of the pipelines. Around that same time, the Environmental Justice Collaborative, the group of environmental organizations, the group of community organizations, hired on our facilitator, Queen. So that was a very exciting summer. So kind of finishing up 2018, 2019, so the council gave the first recommendations to the Northam administration at the end of last year. And during that time, there was a lot of I suppose, questioning of the legal status of the council because of the letter that they had sent to the Northam administration. And then in January 2019, that was when Governor Northam reissued the order reestablishing the council, EO 29, Executive Order 29. And then, of course, with that executive order, he did do a little bit to kind of reframe the charge of the Environmental Justice Council. But I will just leave it there because I think that sets us up in a good place to stop. and to talk about next steps, like the environmental justice flag.
You put them up there on the podium.
So the Queen has asked me to pass these around. It's some information about the Environmental Justice Collaborative. It's just a handful of copies, so I think it's best just to share and pass these down.
Didn't know you all were going to be here, but thank you. I am Queen Shabazz, and I'm from Earth. And I don't think I'm going to live anywhere else in my lifetime. What about you all? So that's why I do this work I do. That's why it's important that we Mother Earth. I visited Yogaville not long ago, and they had a sign saying, "It's time to Mother Earth." And I believe that. It's time to Mother Earth. I'm going to start a little bit with my background and how I got to where I am today, being the coordinator of the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative. As Noah mentioned, my son was poisoned in 1996. I moved from Brooklyn, New York to Virginia in Richmond and renting an older house. So our zip code dictates the kind of housing we live in, our socioeconomic status dictates the kind of housing and the neighborhood that we can afford to live in. So I was living in a 23224 zip code, renting an older house. And I really had already had an early bout with lead poisoning, but it was so long ago, and I was about 9 years old, so I had really forgotten about it. But living in Brooklyn, New York, I had a cousin who was severely poisoned to the point that his eyes crossed, poisoned by lead, his eyes crossed, he was hospitalized, he was chelated. But like I said, at the time I was 9 years old, and I didn't know that lead would come to visit me again. So my son Zaki was about 18 months old when I took I had 4 children and took them all to a well baby visit. And his lead level came back as 30 micrograms per deciliter of lead that he had in his bloodstream. And so I was reminded of my cousin Tony, who has since passed away and who was never what they call a contributing member of society because he suffered brain damage. That's just how poisoned he was. And he was living in a house that his grandparents owned, and so he couldn't very well sue the family, so he never received any kind of compensation for having gone through that. And you all may have heard about the crisis in Flint, Michigan, that kind of put lead poisoning in the news again. And so over the years, it's kind of, you hear about it and then it's silent, you hear about it again and then it's silent. So as it was when my son was poisoned in 96, we hadn't heard much about, since it had been mentioned that it was in crayons, it was in the water in DC, you hear these waterborne notices throughout different cities, and then we kind of forget about it. So when my son was poisoned, and the doctors told me that there was nothing they can do because his level was only 30. And at the time, you would have had to have been 70 in order to receive some kind of chelation treatment, which would take the blood out, take the lead out of his bloodstream. So I basically just was, took my child home, and that's when I started doing the research. And as a result, United Parents Against Lead was formed. I found out later that during the year that my son was poisoned in 1996, that there were 400 other babies that had been poisoned, 400 other children that had been poisoned at that same time. So I thought that when I started the organization, we'd get at least 400 parents to come out and want to work with us and find out what's going on, to get some things in place for our elected officials to protect our children, to protect our homes, protect our water, protect our soil, protect the air. And so, but that wasn't the case. It was still very silent, and I found myself a lot of times just out there by myself, the only one talking, and that got to be a problem because then I became a target. and the officials would literally put me out of their offices, stop receiving calls from me, and just, I was kind of ostracized. I guess they want people to think that, well, she's crazy, so don't pay her any mind. But I didn't let that stop me, and I kept talking, and the organization was founded. We've been here, United Parents Against That has been around 23 years now. And as Kendall said, around 2018, I was hired on to become the coordinator of the collaborative. But a short story prior to that, I was living out my childhood dream. I'd always told my mother I wanted to be a teacher. And so I got to fulfill that. I went back to school, got my license, state of Virginia license to teach elementary school. And I was teaching first grade at George Mason Elementary. Lo and behold, we got a grant from the Father of the James Group, a division of the Sierra Club, to test the water at 4 elementary schools. And the school that I was teaching in, George Mason, along with Ginter Park Elementary, they both had elevated levels of lead in the drinking water. So I was right back, in the midst of having to battle again. Ultimately, I was fired from my teaching position because I refused to keep silent about it. And they did not want me to alarm the parents. They did not want me to tell the teachers. And we had many teachers who were concerned because they had been pregnant. They had been drinking the waters in the schools. And the superintendent at the time said, you're causing an alarm and we might have to shut the schools down. And I was like, I think that's probably what we should do, rather than have the children here drinking this leaded water every day. And I don't know how many of you know about, have heard about George Mason, but it was notorious, for a very low income Title I school where we had rodents running through there, peeling paint on the walls. And so this was just another thing, but we also had a lot of behavioral issues, which is directly linked to lead poisoning, as is, criminal delinquency and all these other multitudes of things that are related to lead poisoning. So I was trying to tell the principal that this could be a direct result of why we have so many children that are in kindergarten and being suspended from school, children that can't sit still, can't learn, and they did not want to see the connection. So anyway, I was fired from my teaching position, and luckily at the same time there was a position that came up with the collaborative. And so at the collaborative, we are fighting many battles, some of which Kendall mentioned, like the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, to actually put a halt to those. The compressor station that's being planned for the Union Hill section, which is a predominantly African-American community based in Buckingham County. And they just actually went in there and did an undercount of the people that were living there in order to get their permit passed. When Dominion went in to get the permit, they said, it's like maybe 5 or 10 people living there, and then we find out that there's hundreds of people living in the immediate vicinity of what would be a catastrophe if the compressor station was to blow up. If the pipeline itself was to have some trouble, these people are living on the front line, and they have just been totally discounted, not counted, overlooked, and just ignored that they were even present. And that's what we've been finding as we do this work. What they have what they call Sorrel communities, which are communities that they send markets and people out to study to see where they would get the least resistance. And oftentimes those are communities like the zip code I was living in, 23224, communities that are depressed, that have from a lower socioeconomic capacity standpoint, and communities where, as I said, they think they'll get the least resistance. And so we found that this was one of those communities that they had counted. Then we do a lot of work in Cumberland County, where they're proposing to put a mega landfill. And what the collaborative does is we actually go to the communities and give them a voice. That council that Kendall talked about, that was established and written into law by the past 2 governors, is really a baby of the collaborative. They were born out of us because we saw the need for a statewide voice. And so we actually bring members of those affected communities to the council to share their stories of what's going on in their communities, and for them to have a say in what they want to happen, and not someone else coming in making all the decisions about what they need or what should happen. So that's what we stand for. And so the collaborative is the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative. And what does the council call themselves now? The Virginia?
The Virginia Council on Environmental Justice.
Right.
So the names are quite close.
Right, so we are not to be confused with them. I think they did that intentionally because they used to be the Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, ACEJ. Just this year they did that. So at their last meeting, I said, you know, that's kind of too close. I think you're trying to have the people confused. So the great works that's being done over here is not to be confused with whatever they're doing. Okay, but we do bring, as I said, affected members of the community to speak before the council. The governor and what's Paola's organization? DEQ. They are supposed to, Department of Environmental Quality, are supposed to take recommendations from the council members. We have 3 or 4 members of the collaborative that are actually members of the council. And that has not happened. They have not taken their recommendations. And so we often write letters, and we have really kind of been at odds when we really wanted to be, we want to work with them, you know, because we know that they have to implement the laws. So the governor, to his credit, has gotten a guru, an equity guru that he just hired.
So there was a request for proposals that the Department of Environmental Quality put out probably about 5-6 months ago now, because they wanted to do a 10-month study assessing environmental justice within that department. And so they chose Solutions, which has done what I've heard being a lot of good work in other states on the issue of environmental justice. And so now they've hired Solutions, and they're starting to move forward, you know, with the study.
Correct. And so we'll be talking with them whenever they get that set up. And I've always been of the opinion I don't see why they need to do a study. Years ago, I was a member of the Senate Joint Subcommittee studying lead poisoning prevention. You know, and it seems that when it comes to us and when it comes to certain communities, there's always got to be years long of studies when we already know what's happening, we already know the effects, we already know the problem. So my thinking has always been that we need to change that. We need to be more proactive. As with the Sorrel communities, let's get in front of it. If we know that a threat is coming, let's be there before it comes. You know, let's not wait until after someone has put in a permit and the permit has been approved, as has been the case in a lot of these communities. They don't even know that their lower elected officials or county supervisors have approved these permits. And then it's so hard to get it undone. You know, and that's where we often find ourselves fighting from behind the gun, fighting from, you know, after they've already said, okay, we're going to do this. It's much more difficult to have any kind of change done when we need to be out in front of them. And so one of the papers that should be coming around will show my son, whose lead level was 30. It will show Sergio, whose lead level was 60. And Sergio is one of the young men that I'll be writing about in my paper called the Gray Paper that I'm, as a Bonner Fellow, that I'm working on this semester. And I'll be visiting Sergio. He's at the Red Onion prison facility in Pound, Virginia. I'll actually be visiting him this weekend to interview him again. He's been sentenced to 45 years. Sergio is a lead poisoned child whose mother called me many years ago to work on his case, and we finally have gotten to the clemency program, and they are looking at his case now. And Sergio did not kill anybody, did not rape anybody, and his case was not, he was not allowed to bring up the fact that he was lead poisoned in court. And finally, this other child here, whose lead level was 89, is a child that lived in Petersburg, Virginia. And this particular case was so important to me because it was right around the time that the city of Petersburg lost a $1.1 million grant, HUD grant, that was supposed to be used to remediate houses of lead hazards. And so perhaps Michael would have never been poisoned if the city had did what they were supposed to do in administering that grant. And you all may have remember seeing this photo. That looks familiar to anybody? This was the picture of the young man who was poisoned in Flint, and he became the poster child for children that were poisoned in Flint. And the young lady who took this picture made his name is Sincere. It made the front page of Time. She is the daughter of the founders of the Richmond Free Press that circulates here in Richmond. Regina Boone took that photo. But this is Sincere. And then we have this picture, which is also a Pulitzer Prize winning photo of a young man, young black child who has been shot. And so I'd like to also talk about the police shootings that we have, disproportionately shooting of African, mostly male children, and know that these are lead bullets that are being used, so this is another form of lead poisoning. And I have actually, through my organization, called for police officers to be tested for lead, because lead is linked to criminal activities, and a lot of police officers, they handle munitions every day. They take them home to their families. They ingest them. It's on their clothes. So I didn't think it was unreasonable to ask that they also be tested for lead, and it may curtail or cut down some on the unwarranted shootings that we have seen.
And Queen, I want to save some time for questions.
Yes, and with that, I thank you all for being here.
Yeah, so what's on your mind? What questions do you all have? We've got about 10 minutes.
Now that we finally have a potentially friendly assembly coming into place, what are the lobbying efforts that are ginning up for that?
Yeah, so just on a phone call last week for the Environmental Justice Collaborative Policy Team. And so right now we're kind of still early on in our conversation, so I'm not able to share specific details with you all. But I can say that we are working on some model legislation that we are hoping some legislators will like to sponsor. And so the main purpose of that legislation is to think about how we are operationalizing environmental justice in the Commonwealth. So last year, well, last General Assembly session, so the beginning of this year, we were working on an Environmental Justice Council codification bill that would have codified the council, because we mentioned that there was a little bit of legal uncertainty about the existence of the council. So anyway, that's what we were working on last year. And so this year we're looking to expand on those efforts, because although we have an Environmental Justice Council, the main thing is that we need a council or advocates looking out for environmental justice communities. We need something that has teeth. We just don't need recommendations that can be ignored. We need to actually operationalize this into our state government and inside our state agencies. So the legislation that we're looking at now, it would help address some of those issues. For instance, incorporating review processes that agencies have to go over assessing environmental justice within their agency, and also giving them the power to alleviate environmental injustices that they find. We're thinking about things like that.
Yeah, and last year we did introduce 2 bills to the General Assembly, and neither one of those passed.
Yeah, they both died in committee, in the Rules Committee.
Yeah, we're working with the newly elected legislators this year and hopefully get a strong bill into the General Assembly and get it passed.
And like, although we can't share it now, like I'm sure the bill will be available soon, and definitely when General Assembly's session starts. So you should look out for it by going to Legislative Information Systems, LIS.
For the Virginia Council on Environmental Justice, how are the members of that chosen and like appointed? And then are they drawn primarily from the activist community, or are there people representing industry and representing, you know, polluters and stuff like that that are part of that?
Good question, and thank you for that question. That is how we wanted it set up, and I believe the original one that was done by Governor McAuliffe was set up that way. But the new one that Governor Northam has implemented earlier this year is made up of a lot of businesses, and which is what we didn't want, because we didn't want people that can influence or was being supportive of Dominion or other big businesses having a lot of say-so on it. But the governor actually made the selections of who's on the council, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the governor made the selection the first go-around too, but I think they were
more community-based. Yeah, this now it's a little more, I guess, balanced, but we wanted the community always to be the majority and have the voice of the community.
Because, you know, when you think about the business sector and industry, there's the Chamber of Commerce, there's all of these businesses that have tons of resources, you know, money resources, and thus people resources, to make sure that they have their voice heard in the governor's ear, in the ear of the General Assembly legislators, in the courts. Like, we know that business has a voice.
Right.
You know, who doesn't have a voice are, you know, the
affect the
right.
community, the impact the community. So that's why the council was initially set up. So we're working to get it back to that and have those community folks have a major voice in decision making of what goes on in our communities. Yeah. Yes.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Marcus. I'm with the one out with the law school. The elevated levels in Richmond Public Schools kind of hit home because I grew up drinking that water. So my question was a follow-on, like any follow-on testing in Richmond Public Schools as a result of that? And then why do you think a lot of the parents, or just thinking back on your time when you had a situation with your child, why a lot of the parents were apathetic or not as outraged or lacking information?
Yes, I think that's because lead poisoning is like linked to the silent killer, like how they say a lot of African Americans have high blood pressure, that silent killer. Lead is the same. You can't see it, you won't know that your child is poisoned until they start school, and they'll be not able to learn and not able to remember. So I think that's why, because that child is not bleeding or broken, and you can't really put your eyes on it to say that something is wrong with the child. I think also because a lot of the parents just had so many priorities that lead got dropped down to the bottom of the list. It wasn't a priority because it wasn't something that they could see. But I know here Dr. Simpson and a couple of her students are here, has been trying to get back, good to see y'all, has been trying to go back into the schools, and they have been denied access, to my understanding. Although the new superintendent says that they have fixed the problem, but he still won't let them come in and do the testing, you know, to prove that. So the people are still actively trying to follow up on that, if that answers your question.
And just to add a little bit, so what Queen was just talking about there, I think it speaks to the wider problem of environmental justice, because you have, you know, like someone gets, a black man gets shot by the police. That is, you know, visible, that is acute. So thinking about environmental justice, we still have the same disparities, but, you know, it's invisible versus visible, acute versus chronic. It's an insidious issue, and I would, in my opinion, I'm sure it's killing many more people.
We have time for one more question.
Are there opportunities for students to come volunteer or help you guys out in anything next year?
Most definitely. I'll leave some of my cards for you. Please contact me. And you all as law students, you know, I'm depending on you all to make the changes that are needed. You know, if it starts with the law, then because I think you all, as the youth, are, you know, you're more outspoken, you're ready to act, whereas my generation will, like I said, become complacent. So I'm depending on you all to use your voices and really revolt. You know, it's time for change. You know, it's time for revolution, and we are the ones who can bring about that change.
With that, I want to thank our speakers today. Thank you all for coming. And as you leave, please do remove all your trash afterwards.
Time to Mother Earth.